So without further ado, let's kick off Women's History Month by welcoming Alaina, Jess, and Tracie, three powerhouses in L&D. Welcome, ladies. So we have four main topics we'd like to cover in today's panel. So the first topic is the journey to L&D, where we'll dive into how each of our panelists found themselves in this industry and get a little bit of background from each of them. Then we'll go to the gender disparity. The next topic is the barriers, and finally, we'll end with the future of L&D. So please drop your questions into the Q&A section, and we'll answer them as we go along. So to get started, let's do a little round robin about just how you guys found yourselves in the space and what your particular expertise is. Do you want to get us started, Jess?
Sure, I sure can. So, hello everybody, Jess Almlie. I've been in the L&D world for 30 years now, basically my entire career. I started my very first job in what I claim to be kind of L&D was I was a trainer at McDonald's, a crew trainer. But then from there, I moved into my first corporate role was in HR, and one of my duties was orientation coordinator. So then LMS administrator, then all of these, and all the way up to most recently, I was the vice president of learning for a employee benefits company, and then I left that 2 years ago to go out on my own. So that is, I've been here hanging out this whole time.
Who's next? Tracie, you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I have not been in this industry as long as Jess, and that is an amazing thing because usually when I say 20 plus years, it's up there. Um, my first L&D job was as a station trainer for Continental Airlines. So I taught you how to de-ice a plane, check in a passenger, load the bag, all of that. And it's been in every industry since then. My specialties now are strategic implementation of technology and learning ops. That's where I really focus through all of this. But yeah, man, how many of us are accidental L&D folk? And then sheer curiosity drives us to become passionate and advocating experts in this field. So glad to be here, y'all.
Well, it sounds like the theme is non-accidental in this group of panelists today. I, like Jess and Tracie, I was not accidental into the learning and education sector. My first job was teaching, like Jess and Tracie. I went after undergrad and I moved to Mexico and I taught English as a foreign language. And it was my job to write the curriculum, to work with people directly live in person, to learn from what could have been better when I facilitated that experience. And I was luckily able to work every week with the same group of people who were going out into the community, teaching English, coming back and telling me, I really wish that you would have focused more on this. So I had this wonderful direct feedback loop with my learners, with the people I was supporting to make sure that my work was really impactful. Fast forward 20 years, I know I don't look that old, but truly, I call myself a data nerd because I'm a really big believer in the power of data, and we'll talk more about that as we get into our panel questions. And so, not surprisingly, my expertise is in helping leaders make better use of data so they can get those powerful feedback loops so that they can know what's working, what's not, make those improvements, and ultimately make smart investments in people development. And that's what I do on a daily basis. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. I love how vast and how widespread the industries are. It's just a very broad industry, isn't it, L&D? So I hope that gives our attendees some clue as to how to direct your questions and the types of things you might want to ask as we go on. So let's jump into our first real topic, the gender disparity. So how does the gender imbalance in leadership within L&D reflect broader industry trends? And how can we empower women in L&D to address or mitigate that disparity? Who wants to go first?
I can do some data dropping because
Yeah.
that's the area I'm passionate about. Um, McKinsey came out with their 10-year report in 2024. Holy crap, y'all. The numbers are, we're actually decreasing in presence in leadership, women across all industries. And L&D specifically, about 67% of women are in entry-level roles. So we are the predominant force in L&D, but once you flip to executive level, 69% of those roles are filled by men. So there is it's not a talent issue. It's not an ambition issue. I really believe it's a broken system issue, because one of the biggest data points that stuck out to me was there is a broken rung problem. Less women are getting hired into middle management roles. It has been on a decline since 2022. So if you don't have a talent pipeline going through all roles, you can't promote up. You can't jump from entry level to director. You have to have that middle management. And right now, for every 100 men promoted, 81 women are promoted. So we really have that kind of barrier in our way, and we've got to figure out how we support our fellow women in L&D, women in any people operations across human resource suffer from this, to be prepared for those middle management roles, because that's what prepares you and enables you to be a senior leader and higher in our profession.
And can you reiterate that percentage again? I saw in the chat, the percentage of women in leadership.
69% of men are in the top roles of L&D. And I do want to clarify, when I say women, and the McKinsey report does this, it's all female identifying. And it's all races and ethnicities outlined. When you actually break it down in a niche, the disparity gets larger for women of color and transgendered women. So please be aware that these are the overall best scenario for women as a whole that I just gave for numbers.
So what's really that's very interesting, Tracie. I think back to, my career when I started in L&D, it wasn't really an industry. I'm going to be honest, it was a job that somebody held here or there in the organization. And so there really weren't high-level leaders that were L&D leaders. There were HR leaders, but that was it. Mostly we were practitioners. There maybe were some managers, but that was it. Now I feel like, and I would say when I started, it was almost all females doing that work. Now I feel like there are, and this is just my own anecdotal experience, I don't have the data to back it up like you do, Tracie, but I feel like there are more men in the field. I'm bumping into more men on a regular basis, but women, even though we've been in this field for, I would almost argue longer, we do not hold the top leadership roles primarily. The men do tend to hold those. I don't think the world has changed that much in that regard. So even though now there are leadership roles, the women are not necessarily the ones holding them.
I think what's really interesting, to your point, Jess, about the L&D industry wasn't an industry like marketing or operations or sales. It sort of came about more organically or by a need. And you also see this too in startups. Like the whole overall trajectory of organizational growth is that we start with a product or a service and we rally people around that. And usually the learning function, which makes sense, that we would ultimately be more strategic and targeted as the organization grows. But what's really interesting is that, and I've experienced this in my work, I started teaching English as a foreign language and fell in love with teaching, but went and got my master's and doctorate in education and human behavior and served like Tracie and Jess in almost every industry. So I can say with some level of experiential confidence that most of the time people are overseeing L&D roles that are not L&D professionals themselves, not because of promotion or lack of promotion issues, but the decision makers are looking to figure out, how do we manage the learning function and who's the best department to oversee it. And I can say from experience that in one organization, our small learning team was moved from operations to HR, back to operations, then for a short stint directly managed by the CEO. And so a lot of those operational HR roles, I think, inherently are led by men. And so I wonder, Tracie, to the data, and Jess, to your point about the sort of ad hoc way that people come to oversee learning and development. At another organization, we had the chief marketing officer overseeing learning and development. It was very weird. And of course, our practices were more marketing as a result, which is not necessarily lending itself to great impact in people behavior change work, side note. But yeah, I think there's an ad hoc dynamic that might also play a role in some of this with regard to women and leadership.
Well, I
There's
find
a
it
whole,
interesting
oh,
to, oh, sorry. I find it interesting that these leadership numbers hold true in every division in corporate America. It's not just L&D where this disparity exists. And I do think it comes into kind of representation matters. If you don't have somebody sitting there to be a sponsor, to be a mentor in a higher role, to tell you the ins and outs, because there is a difference of being a leader of others and a leader of leaders. That is a huge leap. No matter what, anything, what box you check. But men are more likely to have people above them who will mentor in that. And I think as our leadership pipeline narrows in regards to women, there's less of us to go around to really bring up the next level. And honestly, it's across all, whether it's marketing, human resources, operations, finance, like these stats, especially in the McKinsey report, show it's across all levels of the organization. So yeah, that's why I think, I don't think it really, I think based off of industry and division that you're in, it may have an impact, but I think overall the trend line balances out and nulls the impact of industry and division based off of like whether it's traditionally a masculine division versus a feminine division. I hate even saying that.
Jess, you were going to say something at the same time. Do you recall?
yeah, it was a different spin than what Tracie was talking about. I was thinking that overall, our industry, learning and development, I think we really have a governance identity crisis. So I don't know how else to say that, but governance is not the sexy thing that anybody wants to talk about, right? But in terms of how our function is placed in the organization, who we report to, how we run the function. Is it federated, not federated? You know, all of these things, we're all over the map. And that doesn't do us any favors for giving us a solid footing. I think in a lot of ways, you know, I started out by saying when I started in this profession 30 years ago, it wasn't really a profession. It was just a job somebody did. We're still really figuring out how we can best contribute to the organization that we're in. And part of that has to do with the structure.
That's good. Okay, so mentorship, structure, or do we have any other theories or suggestions about how to mitigate the gender disparity?
So there's something that I find really interesting, and this isn't unique to learning necessarily. I think it applies to Tracie's point that the disparity in leadership isn't unique to learning and education. It's present in all departments and probably all industries if we looked at the data. What I think is interesting and not talked about enough is power dynamics. And there's some really great research that Megan Torrance was involved in. She presented it at the Learning Leaders Conference back in the fall of 2024. And she talked about how learning and development often doesn't have a lot of power and influence in an organization for some of these reasons that we're talking about. It's a job that somebody does. There's not a consistent leadership. There's not necessarily a standard of function, though I think, Tracie, you could probably talk more about the operational side of things. And from an operations perspective, what dynamics allow us to have more influence and impact based upon how we're structured. But I think in terms of what can we do differently, is to think more critically about power and influence, and how can learning have more of that, and what can we be doing differently to be more visible in an organization, to ultimately have a greater impact, to have more data that helps us to refine and perfect what it is that we do to support organizations, and think about that through the lens of how do I have more power and influence, which is going to help us be better leaders overall, regardless of what space we're in. I don't think learning thinks about power, influence in the same way that other organizational departments might. And that's an opportunity that I would suggest us to think more about, and go research the work that Megan Torrance has talked about around those different dynamics of power, because there's a lot of ways that we can get power, or that power dynamics are at play. And we probably could be benefited by just reading more about that, and adopting some of those ideas.
You know how feisty you're going to get all the three of us by the end of this conversation, by the
Yeah.
way. I can already tell, because I can tell from Tracy's body language that she's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to need to say something. And I'm just already like, oh, I gotta build on that. But yes, feisty in a good way. I mean, I build on, Alaina, what you have to say, in that I think personally that a lot of the reason why we do not find ourselves in strategic conversations is we do nothing to show that we are worthy of having those strategic conversations. So we do not show up as partners to the business. We show up saying, we're going to help you. We are love to help you. How can we help? And in fact, what that does is that attitude, we think we're being great and helpful, it keeps us in a box. We need to better understand the businesses in which we function and operate so that we show up as business leaders who are partners, who are equals to every other leader in the organization. And then we need to hold ourselves to the same standard, running our functions the way that every other function is expected to operate in the business. And Alaina, that means data. I've got data, I've got measures, because there's no other function in the organization that gets a pass on saying how they are contributing to improving revenue or reducing expenses, and what is their performance metrics and performance data. For some reason, learning and development, we don't embrace that. And I know it doesn't tend to be most of us our expertise or our forte, but we will not succeed as leaders in the business unless we act like leaders in the business.
Right now I'm going to be feisty on two fronts here. As women, we need to own our freaking impact.
Yes, we do.
We're socialized.
Amen.
I got called out in an interview once for a head of L&D role because I kept saying, we built this, we did that. And the guy was like, is it we or I? He's like, because I'm hiring for an I. And I was like, mother trucker. And it's right. We are socialized not to. Like, we want to share the credit with our teams. We want to. And I think as a profession, we also do that. We, like, operations gets the glory on that project that they just implemented. Like, I'll go to a frontline, like basket building. That's always a big goal. Like, how do we build baskets sizes so that way people are checking out with more items, earning us more revenue? And if we do something as L&D, that's part of the success story that operation team tells to the business. We don't say the 7 divisions that used our training had a 15% higher increase in basket size versus the ones who didn't. We don't do causation and correlation. Like, we don't try to find the value of data. And also, we don't think about we think about the business, but I go back to, because we focus too much on the learner. I know that's apocryphal, but the business is our customer, the learner is our consumer. The business wants a return on its investment, whether whatever that looks like, making money, saving money, speed to proficiency, whatever. There are a dozen different data metrics that could support that. The consumer is the one who ingests the product the business bought. The customer is bought. They have to be engaged, because otherwise they're just going to not do it and you won't have ROI. But just because a learner loved your program and it got the highest ratings ever and the highest completions ever, if it has no business impact, you can't show any ROI, the business doesn't care that you just spent 6 months on this amazing program. Yep. There is disconnect. We cannot have that. So once again, it's I over we. What is I, the L&D team, doing? What is I, Tracie Cantu, doing? And I know my subject verb alignment was completely off, but you get my point.
No, this is so good. And it's like you guys are kind of answering the questions that are popping up in the Q&A feature, which we really appreciate the questions going there so we don't lose track of them in the chat. But Hannah asked at first, and you guys really are kind of already answering that, but I want to see if you want to expound. She said, would love to know how we can set ourselves up for success to get to leadership so we can change the current stats. As someone newly promoted into a people leader position, how do I continue my growth? How do we change the future outlook kind of when you're starting out?
So I just wrote an answer to this question
Okay.
in one of my weekly measure editions. And Jess, I'm setting you up for something here. So be ready to go next. I think because Jess talks in her book, I just had the pleasure of endorsing it and so excited for it to come out. Jess talks about how we respond to training requests. And so she'll add her perspective. I think one of the most valuable things that we can do is to translate training requests into a problem solution framework. A lot of times, we, like Jess said earlier, we want to help, but we don't know what problem we're solving, and we're not sure if the solution is truly training or if it's a training plus something else. And so, my suggestion and answer to this question is build the habit of reframing requests for training into a problem solution. So, what problem is it that we're solving, and how are people able to be part of the solution to then target our training to develop people? Because that's all training can do. Training can't fix environmental problems, training can't fix political challenges and culture dynamics inside of the organization, although that's actually we can if we do it very thoughtfully. The point is, if we reframe training requests into a problem solution, what problem are we solving? That gives you your metrics of impact. It's not all about ROI. It can be about, are we making teams more productive? There's an ROI equation on the back end of that, but we don't have to prove ROI if we can simply prove that teams are becoming more productive because now they're talking to each other before there was conflict. We can help that. Problem solution framework will help us to get more power, influence, and ultimately better data to then have that greater impact that we're all looking for.
Yeah, so thank you, Alaina, for that plug for your gracious endorsement and everything else. But I mean, this is one thing I'm very passionate about. And the reason is because when I made the leap into L&D leadership roles, as opposed to a more practitioner role, and especially when I was leading leaders and leading large teams, I very quickly realized that it wasn't enough for us to spend our time perfecting our product. Because we had a rock star team, and there are a couple of my former team members on this call right now. Woohoo! Shout out to you. You guys were you're rock stars. We had a rock star team that created fantastic learning products. But what happened was we weren't solving the problems. And the business was coming to us because when they come and say, we want training, we deliver a fantastic learning product, we get the pats on the back, that's great. But then they say, wait a minute, that the problem isn't solved. Now it's our fault. I mean, training must not have been good enough. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You cannot say that. Our training is dang good. I know that the training is good enough. Something else is going on here. And what I discovered in that time was, after studying parallel industries, because there wasn't much out there to start thinking about this in the L&D field at the time, that, training can't solve every problem, A. And if we provide training to solve the wrong problem, what we do is we waste time, energy, resources, and we ding our own credibility in the process. And anytime we ding our own credibility, now we've just put ourselves back down in that order taking, that transactional place. And so we have to have conversations up front that are to the point of everyone who's chiming in, fall in love with the problem. I think you said, Tracie. We need to solve the problem, find out what the problem is. What's the evidence that shows you that this isn't working right now? Asking those types of questions at the beginning. So we stop jumping to, oh, you need a training? Let's talk about your learning outcomes. The very first thing we do is assume we don't know the problem or the solution yet. And we start asking questions about problem, not about learning. Because most stakeholders have not had the time to sit and think about if there's something else going on. They just have a pain point and they need help. And the best way we can help them is by focusing on that problem and then determining whether or not a learning or training solution can A, solve it, B, solve part of it, or C, solve none of it, and we need to make a different recommendation.
In support of Jess and Alaina's outlook on this, no is a complete and full sentence. When people come to you and ask for training, it's okay to say no. And you're like, but I need to. No, quantity does not equal quality. Does the business put every single goal out as its organizational KPIs each year? No, everything's tiered, everything's ranked in support of. Why do we get away with doing different? Like, how are we not operating in that manner of prioritization? And I know everybody, well, like the business expects, take baby steps, y'all. Like, I'm going to myself, it's like the movie, What About Bob? Baby steps. If you haven't seen it, watch it. Baby steps. Pick one initiative to try and change your model on. Do like an A/B test. Does this actually have impact? Find a good partner, an advocate, somebody who will evangelize on the operations, the finance side of what you're doing. You don't have to turn the cruise ship at a right angle within 60 seconds.
No.
Take your time, do it right, do it meaningfully, and people will start to respect your no and honor your no because they understand you prioritize. Also, be transparent when you communicate to them. Why did you say no? Because I have 2 other things ahead of you that actually impact our annual KPIs and have executive sponsors. Oh, yeah. We can get them all together and have a trade-off conversation if you'd like. They will not like, trust me, they'll walk away. But it's those kind of things. Like, if you don't advocate for yourself, no one will.
Reba has a really good point that I hear all the time. How do we say no when some people I've heard, they're like, if I say no, I might lose my job. If I say no, I'm going to lose credibility. I need this person's buy-in, this person's support, this person to sign my paycheck every month. So here's how I navigate that. And I'm sure Jess and Tracie have something to add as well. When someone says, can you just put something together? Or, hey, we just need to get this thing out there. I think this is going to be enough, or this will be just fine. Some sort of surface level response. I like to take a moment and say, well, this insert time frame, this 10-hour program that you're asking, this 1-hour program that you're asking is going to cost our team this much time to build, or if we buy it, this much to pay our vendor, this much time for staff to complete it. And there's a very simple back of the napkin math you can do about all the staff going through the program, the cost of building it. It's $100,000. If that program does absolutely nothing to influence the problem, are you willing to waste $100,000? And if you're not, then can we take a little bit of time to dig into what's the problem, what's the root cause, and how can people help so that we can, on the front end, get a better chance of having an impact versus just putting something out there. I like to remind people that if we don't have any data to help us understand what's the problem, then we're flying blind, literally. If you don't have any kind of indicator where you're headed, any destination will do, but that's not what businesses want. They want to get a result, and we're trying to help them get there. So doing a little bit of upfront analysis and talking about the dollars and cents invested, do you want to waste that? Usually works every time.
You know, we're really trying to shift the way our entire industry works. And I think so, from those of us who work in the industry, we can see the vision. We can see the vision as to how we need to work differently. But we spend time geeking out and thinking about this stuff all the time. Those of us who were working within the organization, the stakeholders, they do not. And their understanding of how learning and training happens, generally, because of their past experiences, a pretty formal experience. Most of us went through school, we had a teacher at the front of the room, all of that. And so we're trying to change a mindset shift across our entire industry. And that doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't happen overnight in any organization either. So one of the things I talk about quite a bit is when we think about this, this difference between people who are transactionally taking training orders and delivering on them versus what I call working as a strategic business partner, it exists along a continuum. And it is not a black and white one or the other. In fact, most of us fall somewhere in the middle. And our goal is to be continuously taking small steps to shift us closer to the end of that continuum where the strategic business partner does their work. But that happens a little bit at a time. And what it does mean also is sometimes we take the order. We say, yeah, we know we need to do this. And it's a strategic yes because we are trying to build a relationship with that person. We do not have the political power at the moment to push back. This has happened to me. But what we do then is we change how we respond within the request itself. So we literally had one part of the organization come to us and say, we need you to create educational webinars for all of our customers because our people don't have time to answer all these questions on the phone at this point. And I was very skeptical as to whether or not this was the answer. And they said, too bad, ship has sailed. C-suite is all on board. You're doing it. And I said, all right, I'll put my best people on it if you do this. If you, we embed measurement in it so we know what worked and didn't. And B, you give me access to your people after this fact so we can do a full analysis of how you're educating your customers so that next year at this time, we don't end up in the same position. And they were like, fine. So what I did there was I set it up so that we could strategically almost work backwards. But what happened when we did follow through and do that analysis afterwards, we found it was, it was a complete failure. The webinars did not work. But B, we found when we did the analysis that they wouldn't have worked and there were other issues, like it was a very clunky manual system. And right away, that team then went to work solving that problem instead. And guess what? They never came asking for a training order again. Instead, at that point, from then on out, they came to us and said, we're having this challenge and we think it's around training. Will you talk it through with us? So the way that we responded to that set us up to work differently in the next time. And that's what I think often we have to do in order to keep shifting the needle, shifting closer to that strategic business partner part of the continuum.
You know, Jess, you bring up a good point because I think what makes you a strategic business partner is knowing how to play the political game at that level.
Absolutely. And I would say not, I mean, it's playing the political game, but it's also, it's not even, it's more navigating within the politics of the organization. I like that personally phrasing better than playing the political game because then it sounds like it's self-serving. But really, none of the work we do is about us. It's about how does the work get done in the organization. Organizational politics in and of themselves are oftentimes neutral. It's how it informs how work and decisions get done and made. It's how we apply them. And if we apply them for a self-serving view, that's when it gets a bad rap.
Yeah. And on top of that, too, I think one of the things that supports this is a lot of us are taught yes and. We are not an improv team. We did not go into comedy or theater. It's yes if. Like I think Jess's previous example was a perfect illustration of that. Yes, I'll do it, but you need to do this for me. Like we need to have this. That was the if. That was the trade. Like I'm going to do it because I know strategically, politically, corporation-wise, this is the savvy decision to make. However, there's a little bit of a price tag that you need to pay as well. And also, too, another thing that I have found that is very helpful is stop speaking L&D.
Mm-hmm.
No one cares about our jargon. Speak the language of the business. I remember one time an ops team, and I was in grocery at this time, was pushing through 16 hours of training per person to be due in a 60-day period. And then I pulled everything together and I was like, okay, within this 60-day period, each frontline employee who is hourly, and labor is the most monetized data point we use in this business, is going to have 37 hours of training.
Mm-hmm.
So that's almost a full week they're being taken off the floor. Are we okay with that? And all of a sudden, like you could hear the brakes screech because I spoke their data point. I was like, we're going to lose almost a full week of labor from each individual, 120,000 people in these next 2 months. Can we afford that? And they were like, no, thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate that. And that was like, and it's those little things, like you don't have to walk in. It's not like Wolf of Wall Street. It's much more a civil conversation in a language that both of you can relate to and understand.
This is good. I'm sorry, I got to jump in because I want to make sure we are honoring the questions that I've begged everyone to put in the Q&A section. So Sharon is asking about, she said, does anyone ask their stakeholders to sign off on learning requests? I promise you that will be the most appropriate no. If you ask for the business goal and criteria of success outlined and then ask the stakeholder to sign off, the sign off is gold. Does anyone do that?
We used to do that in our the organization when I was the leader. We would ask for sign off once we had agreed upon moving forward with a training. However, I will say that this sign off begins in the intake process. So we need to make sure that we're asking the right questions even up front in that intake process to determine whether or not the sign off is even needed later on. So some of the, if it depends on what's most important to your organization, but if it's important that every yes that you give is tied back to a strategic initiative, in the intake process, you need to be asking what strategic initiative it's tied to, and because that will tell you, do we even spend our time to do a deeper dive and determine whether or not this is a problem that learning can solve by asking some of those questions up front. I spoke with one gentleman when I was doing research for my book, and in the intake process, he always asked for an executive sponsor because in their organization, if a project didn't have an executive sponsor, it wasn't a large scale project. And so if somebody couldn't answer that, it was likely a pet project that somebody had. And so that's a few things that we used to do or that I've heard of in the past.
For myself, we've used prioritization matrix, like just had a question, be able to give everybody a score on a continuum, and then that would prioritize our workflow based off of that. It was very transparent, it's very simplified. It could really communicate well across, and people could then see like, oh, if I get an executive sponsor, I can up the prioritization up. So they knew how to advocate for themselves before they came to us, if they really felt that their stuff was going to make an impact and needful for the business.
I think it's worth saying that people don't have to literally sign off in order for the sign off to happen. And I think Jess and Tracie, your examples of executive sponsorship is one way of getting a sign off. Another way of getting a kind of sign off or a buy in is working with someone who has an investment in the outcome of your program to create like a logic model, or I call it an impact hypothesis in my book, where you basically are just aligning dominoes from here's what's in our training program, here's how the program is going to develop people, here are the KPIs that we're looking to influence because people are doing this differently and better, and here's the strategic organizational priority on that business end of the equation that we're looking to influence over time. Is this something that makes sense? And is this what you're looking for us to do and support or not before we then go design something? And I found that, like Jess said, these are part of the intake. We put pieces of the puzzle together to align how investing in training is going to build people, KPIs, and lead to those organizational priorities coming about. Put it in front of people, get their buy-in before you go designing, whether that's via email, in a quick meeting, or in some kind of shared Trello or other project manager. Give people a chance to give you feedback on it. And that's another way of getting buy-in or sign-off without having a formal process that I think is really effective.
So a good follow-up here, also in the Q&A chat. Leah asks, what is your recommendation for an org that does not have established business goals or KPIs to ensure that I have a seat at the table as an L&D professional?
I'm just taking a really deep breath here because that is not an organization I'd want to be working for.
Ooh.
Just saying it honestly.
That was my first thought too.
Tell them.
So when I was doing research for my book, I was interviewing learning leaders from across all different sizes of industry, all different industries, all different sizes of companies. And one, I was trying to find out if they were able to work as a strategic business partner, what did they do differently? And if they weren't, what held them back? Now, oftentimes, a lot of what we've been talking about, what holds us back is our own selves. We're masters at unintentional self-sabotage, but that's an alternate, that's another topic. This one is one where there are actually some organizational challenges that probably will hold you back from being a strategic business partner to a certain degree. And there was one woman who I talked to who was in this very same situation. There weren't any KPIs. It was a smaller company, and the goals of the company were just to be better at everything they did. and be the premier whatever in their industry. What she had to do was essentially lead up. And so she started working with her CHRO to say, I really feel like we can't do our work effectively without some additional direction. Can you start asking these types of questions to advocate for us in meetings? And eventually that did happen. It didn't happen overnight, but that was what it took in that organization to start getting a little bit more direction. I would also say build strategic relationships with those in upper level leadership if possible, or encourage the person that you report to be able to do that as part of that leading up, if you will.
Another question, Jada asks, I am an L&D org development consultant. When I put together recommendations for clients, they often still want training, although I have recommended that they not have training. The business side of me wants to say, yes, let's push through and give them the training. Yet the unethical side says to me that I should not turn down this work that pays my bills. How do I find a balance? What do you think, Jess? You're smiling knowingly.
Well, I'm smiling because I just worked with a group last week and they brought up a very similar, this was an internal, but the question was from this very large L&D team, if we start saying no to things, then are people still going to come to us and want to work with us? Or are we going to become the team in the organization that, well, don't go talk to the learning team. They're just going to tell you no anyway. And what I can tell you is that this is an ethical situation for external consultants for sure. However, when you handle this correctly and you actually are solving the right problems, it increases your credibility and it makes you more valuable to the organization in the long run. And so I believe I saw that happen in my organization with our team when we started, pushing back, if you will, that gently and not fulfilling every training request with the training and diving into the real problems and finding out what they were and making different recommendations. We actually had more people start to come to us and ask us. They just started asking different questions. Instead of, can we have a 30-minute e-learning? It was, hey, we've got this talent challenge. So I believe it's an ethical dilemma. It for sure is, especially when you're an external consultant.
I like what Jess is talking about is really just performance consulting. And at the end of the day, training is a lever that we can pull to develop people and to get the performance that we seek, because it's all a performance play. We're looking for some kind of change in the organization and how are people contributing to that. So I really think leaning into the performance consultant dynamics, and there's an excellent book, Partner for Performance. I didn't write it. It was written a long, long time ago. I reference it anytime I can because it's a very under-known book. Jess is looking for it on her shelf. I love it.
Yeah, it's right here. It's orange.
That's right. Yeah, it is. It has templates and tools and the right questions to ask. But I really think our whole industry, going back to the earlier questions, what can we do as an industry to have more power, influence, and to get those opportunities for leadership? It's really about being a performance consultant. And you can hear all kinds of training professionals push back on that and say, no, this is our lane. This is what we do best. And I say, no, we're a service partner. We're a business unit, just like Jess is talking about, and focusing on what's the performance problem and what are the solutions and how can we guide and support in that. And from an external consultant's perspective, it's about maybe I can't help you with this training request, but actually this would be a better solution. And here's somebody who can help you with that. And just point them at that direction, maybe stay involved as a strategic quality assurance partner. But yeah, lean into that performance consultant mindset. I think that will make our entire industry have greater impact and more sustainability, because we're not going to be ebbing and flowing with AI, because we're focused on how do we help people and how do we help organizations perform better. That's a hands down strategic human thing that we can uniquely do that technology cannot do for us. And yeah, that book will help you get started with that mindset.
I want to answer this a little differently. One, if you are in the position that paycheck is make or break. I get it. We all have to make those decisions. Don't ever feel guilty about putting your survival first. Because I know as independent people, like that, it's the difference between paying your mortgage and keeping your house or staying in your apartment. Do it. However, if it's not, I would say just ask them, but come prepared with a solution. I don't think this is the right solution. This is what I think would do better. What are your thoughts? Just open up the conversation. You don't have to shut it down as an A or a B. It really is only if you are having a financial crisis that I think it is a binary decision. But I do want to just call out that if it is a financial crisis, then it's more about the ethics of your survival and your families than it is the ethics of somebody having to sit through another next button training. So please take care of yourself. Put your own oxygen mask on first.
I love that, Tracie. I think it goes back to, for me, that what's the opportunity in the order? So the training request has come in, you know you're going to fulfill it, but what are you going to do to add value that will help that person to move their needle as well?
We got a tricky question in the chat from Lena. She says, when do you stop leading up and start going straight to the source? If I keep leading up to someone who is not capable and has no power base to make a difference, how do I navigate to get things done without being dismissive to them? Not easy, and it's a huge roadblock in my performance and ability.
So I can speak to an example where I was working internal at an organization, and one of the big roadblocks to me getting the data that I needed to be able to understand how impactful our programs were and where we could improve it and what other supports people needed to do their jobs well. The roadblock was a person who the CEO hired, and it was their best friend, and they were wildly unqualified for their job, and they would not have conversations with me. And so there was no opportunity for leading up. There was nothing that I could do because this roadblock was a human being who would not communicate with me, and I couldn't get buy-in from anybody else because of her relationship with the CEO. What I ended up doing is I went around her, and I did an investigation to find out, where is the data coming from? Where is it going? Who's managing it? And I ultimately found that the reason this person wouldn't communicate with me was because they were so far behind in getting their data systems updated so that we could use that data and analyze it and get the insights that we needed. And so what I ended up doing is I offered one of my team members who was new, and I said, we have some people power that might be able to help you manage the data. Would that be useful so that we can all get the data and the analytics that we need to make strategic, important decisions going forward? I said, I can allocate for the next month 20 hours a week. Would that be helpful? And what do you imagine happened? I got a response from that person. The relationship did a 180, and all of a sudden we built new systems to collect that data so it wasn't so painful for them, because the system they were using was horrible. I could make a suggestion. Everything changed. And it was in me going direct to the source, but around it, and doing a little investigation to find the root cause of the problem, and then offering a solution that completely changed that dynamic for everybody and the organization. So sometimes you have to ask for forgiveness, not permission, but doing so in the service of helping the organization get what it needs, which in this case was data, can go a long way.
Okay, ladies, I can't believe how much time we have left. So I want to skip ahead to the future of L&D. And we just got another, okay, not a real question in the chat, but more of just an amen. So let's talk about the future of L&D for a little bit as we close out. How is the learning and development industry expected to evolve in the coming years, and what key trends will shape its future? What do you think, Tracie?
AI came to mind today, and I used the quote, AI is like glitter. I don't have to go find it. It will find me. So I'm not going to talk about AI. It is emerging technologies. I mean, we couldn't have predicted what's available now 3, 4, 5 years ago. Those will be enablers, but I think we have to move from a support and service function to an enablement function. It is about scaling our impact effectively and efficiently, and not just by throwing headcount at it or people at the problem. Like, how can we simplify? How can we produce self-serve options? How can we automate? A lot of what we do, because we are amazingly creative people, we treat everything bespoke. Like, people really want to get in there and put their creative stamp on stuff, and I love that. But we should templatize and rinse and repeat a lot more, because those type of processes allow us to scale our impact. Every time your organization signs a new vendor, procurement doesn't create a new process. They have a procurement process. And that's what allows them to go through and keep the flow going and monitor what's going through. And I think that's really where learning operations comes in. It's like portfolio management, doing risk assessments, validating impact. Where's the engagement? How are we going through rinse and repeat in this style ops versus compliance versus leadership and development? And emerging technologies will make that easier for us. It won't be just a couple individuals with a little higher level Excel skill than the rest of us, but we really do have to think of ourselves more as an enablement function than a service and support function.
Do you have anything to add, ladies, about the future of this space? What do you think?
Oh, of course we do. We're just waiting to see who's going to go next. I can see Jess going. Is she going to go? Should I go? Should I wait?
That's exactly what we were. That's exactly what I was doing. I was like, okay,
which is
go ahead, Alaina. You go.
Two things, and this has been said, I think, by the two of you, and at least a conference presentation, a book, an article a million times, and by many others, and myself included. So I'm not going to take credit for this. I'm just going to put it out there. Think more like a business unit and less like a learning function. So that's, in addition to what Tracie is saying, we are not service providers. We are enablers of XYZ. And to be powerful enablers, we have to think like a business, thinking about things like scale and efficiency and standardization and impact and strategy. So that's the second thing that I would say. I'm a highly strategic person. I'll tell you very transparently that in roles I've played as an internal worker, that strategy and that strategic mindset isn't always welcomed, because you question things. Is this the best use of our resources? Is this going to have the outcome that we think? What are the consequences of doing A versus B? But that strategic thinking, yes, it might ruffle some feathers, but it is how we manage our resources wisely, which in the end makes us a better business unit, because we are using our resources wisely, strategically, in a scalable way. So think like a business owner, not like an individual contributor, regardless of where you sit in the individual contributor, manager, or high-level leader. Everybody, if they think like a business and they think about managing resources and they think strategically about consequences, is this the right thing? Is this the right time? Is this a good use of our investment? We will have a greater impact, and you will not be so worried about losing jobs when times get tough.
Yeah, and to bring it back, I think, Alaina, everything you said, that then positions us to be more impactful leaders in the organization as well, overall. So I'm trying my best, Casey, to bring it all the way back to this leadership piece. But I mean, the only thing I would add to that is we do not have space in our organization for nice to have functions. And I think that will become more and more apparent. Nice to have functions that don't move the business forward. And so I see our industry, number one, anything and everything we do that's transactional, we should make it a process, or a tool will take it over and do it for us. That's going to happen. The things that we then need to focus on are the things like performance improvement. How do we help really improve the performance of the talent in the organization? Because that's always going to need to happen. Strategy, the tools, at least not anytime in the near future that I can see, are not going to take over the strategic conversations and strategic decisions that we need to make. And So letting go of transactional work, I think, in favor of our strategic relationships, our ability to collaborate, our ability to navigate within the organizational politics, org savvy, our ability to build strategic and impactful relationships in the organization. Those are all the things that I see our function needing to do more of in the future in order to continue to solve talent challenges, which is what we're really good at anyway.
I'm going to say something controversial. Stop focusing on skills. Seriously, skills are fleeting.
Tracie would be laughing too if she wasn't muted.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Stop focusing on skills and start focusing on solving problems for the organization. That what's the problem? What are we trying to accomplish? Skills is like a sliver of a thing, and it's fleeting. Skills are finite, they're temporary, they evolve. Building people who are capable, who are adaptable, who have an agile mindset, who are open-minded, coachable. These are the kinds of people that we need in organizations, and the skills associated that are kind of meaningless. And the amount of time to do skills gap analysis, skills assessments, evaluating skills, it's so expensive and costly, and it's not necessarily where we should be spending our time in L&D. And tech vendors will try and sell you on skills related things and why you should focus on that. And don't get caught up in that. Stay strategic. Think about the consequences. Think about what's going to be the most supportive for an organization, and solving their most important people problems and performance problems is going to be the lens that will win every single time.
Yeah, so I'm attempting to wrap up, but we just might need to go over just a bit, everybody. So if that is the case and you need to hop off, please do. We understand you'll get a recording of the full webinar. So I did get a few more spicy questions in the Q&A that I'm hoping we can slip in real quick. Sharon asks, Alaina, did you get mansplained when you were in a practitioner role, thinking strategically? And is that why you went into being an independent consultant?
Yes. No, actually, no, the mansplaining wasn't part of that. It was actually this. It was that I saw an opportunity in my last role as an individual contributor slash leader. We were kind of a flat department. And I saw an opportunity to make us a revenue generator versus a cost center. And I pitched an idea because at the time we were changing the way that the department was facilitated and managed. And I saw an opportunity. I pitched it to the leader at the moment, and he said no, and here's why. And he basically demonstrated to me that the way that they were going to continue running the department was always going to be a cost center, and never were they going to explore any other way outside of the realm of that dynamic. And I realized that's not the place that I want to invest my time and talent, and I would be better placed somewhere else. And then I went out, and now I own my own business 5 years plus later.
Another good question that just slipped into the chat. Do we think L&D will evolve to HR tech?
Can I say hopefully out of selfishness and like career longevity? I have an opinion that our profession is starting to mature like the HR profession has. And because of that, we are seeing the development of subdivisions within it. Like HR has payroll, benefits, employee relations throughout, that L&D is getting more mature in that functionality as well, that you need people who can kind of niche down in like learning technology, instructional design, facilitation. The L&D team of one, though I admire the hell out of you if you're on this webinar and you are that person. Holy crap, we should make you a saint and put a day up for you. But that organization is setting themselves up for long-term failure because of what we need to do to adapt and at the speed we need to do it. It's not that team of one's problem. It's the organization's problem for not seeing the value or reading the writing on the wall, in my opinion. But I do think we will get portions of L&D who do evolve into departments like HR tech. Yes, absolutely.
I will say this, Tracie, to your point about the team of one, because I was that for quite a while. the way that we were able to function is that we were highly integrated with other departments. So we had managers of other departments, we had leaders of other departments highly involved in the training process. And it was incredible because everybody knew what training was doing because they were involved in it in some way. And it was my job to manage that. And I would say we had greater visibility and impact because of the interdepartmental or interdisciplinary involvement. And I think that outcome, if we could strategically create that same dynamic, whether you're a team of one or a global team, it's that interdepartmental investment in the training and people development function that was so successful. So I would just put that out there as another perspective.
Awesome. Ladies, this has been fantastic. And actually, our last question in the Q&A is kind of why I popped up this screen for you guys all to see. These fantastic women have so much to offer, so many resources, documents, books, all sorts of stuff. Go to their, get the QR code and go to their LinkedIn pages, and you can connect with them and get a lot of the information that you are seeking. Guys, this has been amazing. The chat is kind of going crazy with so much positive feedback. Everyone seems to have really enjoyed this. There's talk of extending this out in some iteration that we might need to chat about later. But thank you all so much for joining us. Don't forget that we will be celebrating Women's History Month for the full month of March every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So check out that link. I might drop it in again so you can go to that landing page and see what else you might be interested in sitting in on this month. But thank you so much, everyone. This has been amazing.